In 1888, Australian artist Frederick McCubbin put a bunch of coloured triangles and rectangles together and created Melbourne, 1888. McCubbin's painting is displayed in the Ian Potter Gallery, Melbourne City, part of the National Gallery of Victoria. McCubbin was an Australian artist and one of the founding members of the Heidelberg School, an art movement that championed Australian Impressionism. First impression I get is of the triangles and rectangles. Sure, as buildings, steeples and spires, these are expected shapes, but because of the haze, texture is muted, and this highlights the geometric forms of both the buildings and their shadows. Paintings like Melbourne 1888 are a record. Yes, photography had been invented, but as now, a good artist, whether photographer or painter, captures more than an image. They peer into the soul of a place. Melbourne in 1888 had progressed from Australia's second major European colony in 1835 to become a rival for Sydney, a rivalry which still continues. It was a time when the steeples of cathedrals were the most prominent items on the skyline, but in which the large rectangular buildings of commerce, especially on the waterfront, also assumed a growing place. As we survey the waterfront, we have the now well-established industry of steamships to the fore. They are crowding the port, some about to leave or having just arrived, their smokestacks hazing the raking light. The angles on the smokestacks look built for speed, somehow swept back by the wind as they ply the sea, only looking out of place now as they wait in port, but ready to spring forth again once their cargo has been disgorged and a new one loaded. Low light of the coming evening is tinging the clouds with colour, and the water in the foreground is reflecting the scene on those patches of water not disturbed by wind. Why evening? Looking at the map of the port, I think McCubbin is looking east, with the westerly sun casting shadows, like this steeple, away from him. The haze on the waterfront also speaks of a day's work being near to completion. Because of the haze, the buildings in the background have lost texture, becoming flattened, their tonal values all quite similar, perfectly reproducing what happens in fog and haze. McCubbin has achieved this effect by painting slabs of desaturated colour, triangles and rectangles. This is obvious when you get in close, only resolving into buildings and shadows when you pull out. A few shadows, all consistently placed, provide three dimensions, layers of the city growing larger as they move back from the water. The city itself barely takes a third of the canvas, the sky and water the most. The ships, painted with greatest detail and sharper lines and delineations, would appear to be the subject of the painting, but the mass of yellows, dull reds and browns take over our view. The colours of well-constructed buildings sitting in the evening light, their proud steeples and spires pointing to the sky. Melbourne, a growing city, a hub of activity, a centre of commerce, a place where a man, well, it was 1888 after all, a place where a man might make his mark. Apart from a hint of blue at the top, the painting comes across as being painted in a Zorn palette, a very limited palette of colours which does not include blue. Of course, Anders Zorn had only begun painting himself in 1888, so McCubbin was just doing his own thing. His colour choices demonstrate the effectiveness of using a limited palette in order to unify a painting, something modern filmmakers also do through setting a colour tone for a movie. There is a complete absence of people in the painting, surely a conscious decision of McCubbin. He is showing off the city itself, not just as a stage for human activity, but with its own inherent and growing charm, sophistication and established presence. As for the lack of people, no doubt knock-off time had come and the dock workers and sailors were all down at the pub. Melbourne today is a bustling cosmopolitan city and has been voted the world's most livable city 6 years in a row. In McCubbin's time, Melbourne had enjoyed decades of growth and wealth arising from the Victorian gold rush. the California of the Southern Hemisphere, and around the same time, with thousands of people pouring in from overseas. Unlike Sydney, which had a stronger convict past, Melbourne was built to a greater degree by wealth, by free settlers and international immigrants, many seeking gold. It's not his only painting featuring his hometown. The Old Stables looks like it is set in a city, likely to be Melbourne. Falls Bridge, Melbourne, gives us the sun setting over Melbourne. Arrival of the Duke and Duchess of York, Melbourne 1901, painted in 1908, gives us an abstracted view of the fanfare surrounding the proclamation of Australia as a nation, the Commonwealth of Australia. Here, with Collins Street, painted in 1915, McCubbin has moved beyond Impressionism. This one painted only a couple of years before his death. Collins Street is one of Melbourne's most iconic streets, and McCubbin has focused more on its energy and movement than on portraying the buildings. It's interesting to contrast his Collins Street with that of later artist John Brack, and his focus on movement too, but also dull uniformity, Australia in the 1950s. But our painting today, Melbourne 1888, gives us a time before the growth of Melbourne had been fully realised, when the city was still rapidly growing as a centre of commerce and industry. Its layered buildings moving upwards from the docks, its golden glow perfectly describing its potential, and the haze unifying its colours. Has McCubbin captured the soul of Melbourne? Well, it does not sparkle in bright light, nor is it brash and saturated colour. Rather, it is established, solid, golden, being crafted from the Australian soil for the long haul. A place where anyone might make their mark. Melbourne, 1888. Well, I've lived in Melbourne for almost a quarter of a century, so forgive me if I like the place. Marvellous Melbourne, people call it, and with good reason. Capturing an entire city through art is surely the work of many artists, and McCubbin's painting is one of those foundational pieces in the canon. Somehow peaceful and bustling at the same time. Classic Melbourne. Well, that's it for now. Please like and subscribe as I ask you every time, but you do what you want to do. But I'll see you next time.